On this episode, we feature owner of Wind and Raven Coaching, author of This Is How It Feels to Heal, a shamanic journey through cancer recovery and life changes. I'd like to welcome Stephan Patterson to the show. How you doing, Stephan?
I'm doing great, Dylan. How are you doing today?
Excellent, man. Hey, thanks for taking the time out tonight to do this. I know you're a busy guy. You got a lot going on. You got a fascinating backstory, really amazing story. Maybe it's got you to the point of what you're currently like involved in as far as coaching and authoring a book. I'd really like to just maybe get started with just kind of the backstory of who you are, kind of let the listeners know kind of where you came from, maybe before your diagnosis, and then we can maybe jump into when you were diagnosed with cancer in 2011.
Okay, well, I'll try to make it quick. That there's so many segments of that I could go on with, but I feature a lot of the things that a lot of people have with sort of a childhood with bouncing back and forth between parents that were divorced and lots of family drama and things like that. And it's something that a lot of people go through. But what I ended up doing is I dropped out of high school, bought a one-way ticket to the West Coast, ended up joining the Army, went into combat infantry for a while, got out of that, and then followed the Grateful Dead around the country for a few years before Jerry Garcia died. And then that
Nice,
happened,
nice.
and I just happened to be in Corvallis, Oregon, at Oregon State University in the early days of the dot-com experience, and I got involved in that. And so for the next 15, 16 years, I was around for the whole cultivation of what we know as the online world today with blogs and social media and things like that. And that was going great for me. I was very successful in all the ways that people quantify that as far as money and all these other things. And then suddenly in 2011, I passed out, fell down a flight of steps, woke up in the hospital, and they told me that I had terminal liver failure and I had between 6 months and 3 years to live. And to that, being a self-starter my whole life and never looking for excuses, I just simply said to them, I don't buy your myth of death. Literally, I said that. And I went home. I was in a position where I was able to just sort of go back into my home office because I've been working remotely that entire experience since 1997. And sort of pay the people that were running my websites and things at the time. And I looked into people that weren't telling me I was dying. So I got into holistic healing and things like that. And I found a spiritual path, and I changed all of my habits. I eventually gave up my career after about 2 years. I sold it all to Yahoo, where it is still today. And I embraced all forms of the sort of spirituality, and I sort of settled on shamanism because I had been introduced to that. And I really liked the way that it resonated with me when I would speak to some of those people. And so that pretty much carried on for the next few years up until 2015 when I was invited into a recovery group for people from drugs and alcohol. And they wanted me to sort of tell them about how I address this whole sort of quasi my life is over, which is a lot of people in drug and alcohol think that way because, their social network's gone. They can't go to the game without doing this or all these other things. I sort of hit it off with them. Next thing you know, I turned into a recovery coach, and then eventually became a drug and alcohol counselor. Then a couple years later, because I'm a veteran, the VA picked me up, and they discovered that I had cancer in my liver as well. That was in 2017, and that's when things really, really started to even more unfold for me on my spiritual path as well. So on one side, I was a drug and alcohol counselor. On the other side, I was this budding shamanic guy, and doing all this stuff in my own way, not sort of pretending to be something else, just sort of doing it in my own way. And that led up till January of 2019 when I received a transplant, and we managed to keep the cancer inside the liver. And so after the transplant, I was cancer-free. I had a new liver thanks to my donor, and forever grateful there. And since then, I've been rebuilding my life. As far as my work goes, a year later, this is 2019, 2020, I was all ready to launch. Coronavirus hit, and so I went through the lockdown in the U.S. And then one thing that I've been saying the entire time I was sick, those 8 years, was that when I was done with this, and I knew the whole time I was going to get by. I had a very positive outlook the entire time that I was going to travel. And so I left the United States on October 1st, 2020, to the first country that opened, which was Colombia. And I've been traveling in Latin America since. And as I talk to you right now, I've been in Cozumel, Mexico now for 3 days.
How are you enjoying South America? Not to get off topic
Well,
too much, but that's cool.
I really loved South America. And, I would have never, of all the things that I thought about, because most of my spiritual work was based in Celtic and Nordic type things because of my own sort of the way that I perceive my ancestral past. And, if I was going to do this, I want to do this in somewhat of an authentic way. And then suddenly this happened. And I couldn't be more thankful for it today, grateful for it today, because it landed me in Medellin, Colombia on October 1st, the day they opened. I was on the first flight out of Atlanta. And, I've been moving. I've taken 35 airplane flights. That was my last one that got me here in the past 15, 16 months, whatever it's been. I've been all over. And to answer your question, I really love the people of Colombia. I can't speak for the rest of it because I haven't been to those other places, but the friendliness, the openness, the absence of some of the sort of mundane things in the United States that people in the United States would not think are mundane, such as race and class and all these things, aren't really part of that down there. And it was refreshing, surprising. But after I was there, for a year, I sort of understood that, and I'm grateful for it because it's given me another, not only a deeper outlook on my own life, but just humanity in general. How it's really not that hard just to look at the other person and say, "Hey, I am me, you are you, and now what?" Without any preconceptions as to
Right,
what that might be.
right. That's awesome. Now, going back to your diagnosis, so there was no maybe fear or worry that you were going to overcome this cancer when you were first diagnosed. You just
The cancer didn't come until 2017. On it was the day after Valentine's Day in 2011. So it was the 15th of February that I just was walking down a flight of stairs and I blacked out. And what that was the result of was a situation called hepatic encephalopathy, which is something that is common with people in end-stage liver disease, where your body's no longer processing the toxins and it causes ammonia to build up and it gets into your mind, your brain, and it causes the synapses not to fire correctly, and it causes all kinds of problems, confusion, not being able to speaking with a slur, or not being able to even say the words that you're trying to say, forgetting what you're even talking about. There's a whole bunch of stories that I talk about in my book about what that condition was like. And it's really one that has to be experienced to really to appreciate. It's kind of like what I say is trying to explain to somebody the taste of salt who's never had salt. There's nothing else to compare that to.
right,
And so the only way you can talk about salt with somebody is if they've tasted salt. And so to get back to the fear part, no, I'd never, because even when I got on that one-way ticket out of Chicago, Illinois to the West Coast in 1985, I had a backpack and I was going to hike to Canada. It didn't end up that way. I wound up 3 weeks later meeting some people that I talked to, and I ended up joining the Army, and then it was down in Fort Benning, Georgia, in no time at all. But I've always been a person that sort of tries to look for the next best choice, and so I've, without tooting my own horn, sort of the way that I don't even know how it happened. I always look at the positive in the whole thing, and not some kind of toxic positive where you try to bypass anything. I'm fully aware that everywhere I've ever stepped, I'm the one that got there. I'm not a victim of anything. But it's up to me now to try to make the next best choice on what to do next. And that's what got me through the crazy .com world in the early days when people would say you work for a what, and I was trying to say, no, this is going to work. And that did well. And so I sort of carried that through the .com experience. And when I got that news, I was in a position to say, okay, now it's time to totally recalibrate and let's figure out what the next best choice is now and just keep doing that. And I dropped all kinds of things. I changed all my habits. I went vegan for a while. I embraced spirituality, which I'd never been spiritual at all. And those were things that felt good and felt like they were going to help me. And so that's the direction I went. So there was never any fear of death. death is going to happen to all of us eventually. It's just
Right.
between now and then what we do about it. So I always look at it like, well, I'm going to try to do the best things I can, knowing that that's going to inevitably happen, but it doesn't mean it's going to happen tomorrow.
And what do you maybe credit your, your resilience and you were able to overcome this? Do you credit to like just, positive thinking, or is it a combination of things like with your diet, um, you know, maybe your mindset, your shamanistic practices? Like what is it, what do you credit it to?
All of those things. I can't give any of those things credit for getting me anywhere. I'm the one that has to take action to do it. We can all talk about what we want to do. I want to do this. I want to do that. I want to quit smoking. Well, why don't you stop smoking? There's a big difference between planning and action. And one thing that I've managed to be able to do consistently is take action. Now, a lot of times that action doesn't end up going the way that I do, but I take something from it. What did I do that could have been different? Even in the worst case scenario, if it goes really bad, all right, well, what did I learn about that or me or something, and try to build on it. Take every situation as something that you can draw something from and build upon. And again, to answer your overall question, where'd that come from? I don't really know. That's kind of been the way that I've been wired my whole life. And it just really came out more when I sort of had that sword of Damocles over me of, okay, now your life has been time stamped. You've got 6 months to live. Well, screw that. There's a lot of decisions I can make. Let me see if I can change that. And so 8 years later, still with the diagnosis of 6 months to live, having also had liver cancer added to the equation, I made it.
Wow. That's pretty amazing. Now your book, it's about this incredible journey that you went through, correct?
It is. And it basically starts with that conversation where I was diagnosed. And I said, the title of the first chapter is I Don't Buy Your Myth of Death. And I literally said that when the doctor gave me that diagnosis because, my whole life I've been told, even when I was a musician back in the early 80s playing heavy metal music, in Chicago, people were like, nobody's ever going to love that. Nobody's going to like that. But I kept doing it. And then went into the military, blah, blah, blah. I got out of the military, and then the dot-com phase came at the earliest days of it. And people were like, you're never going to make a go of that. And I ended up becoming very successful. I had a radio show on Sirius Satellite. I was speaking across the country to groups. And really, even that, it wasn't because I was really, truly an expert in any of that. I think that I just sort of honed in on what would be the best way to present myself and what are these people looking for. And somehow in all of that, without me trying to fake it to make it, I think that they saw the vulnerability and the authenticity in the sort of way that I approached it. That, I'm trying to figure this out as I go too, but this looks like the best way to go. And I think that it's sort of a continuation of that. And so the book talks about how that sort of manifests in my life during the time of the illness itself. And it also chronicles how I sort of went into this sort of quasi shamanic guy or whatever, and then also a drug and alcohol guy or whatever. And I say it like that because I'm not those things. I'm me. And I just keep doing this, basically the same thing that I've always done my whole life. And I try to share that with others in the way that I do. And I felt that the book was a good way to do that because I had a lot of people that followed me on my blog and my posts on Facebook and social media all throughout those 8 years. And not that I owed it to them, not that I was doing it for them or anything, but I felt like, they were there with me too. And a lot of them said some great things. There's some great quotes from them in there. And so I put it together thinking, maybe somebody that was in a situation like I was in 2011, if they could pick that book up, or maybe it's 50 years from now, somebody gets something out of it, I can sort of give back in the way that so many people helped me. Everybody from the doctors to the random, spiritual person halfway across the world to the guy across the street that I talked to, just to try to give back in some way without sounding cheesy about it because it's serious. We all have to give and receive. We can't receive if we can't give. We talk about, oh my gosh, the world is against me and all that. Ditch that stuff. ditch that stuff. Just go out there. There's infinite amount of possibilities. In every situation, there are opportunities, whether you see them or not. So you have to choose to look for them. The difference between looking and seeing. You know, you can look at the world and say everything's screwed up, but if you see it for what it is, you might be able to find a path through.
You mentioned like it's, you know, potentially like kind of part of your programming or kind of how you were built or designed. Have you ever given it any thought that perhaps you were designed in that way to overcome some of the things in your life that you're currently had to overcome in order to maybe help others and to kind of do what you're doing now?
Well, I hope so. You know, I'm not going to be so hubris and to think that, you know, somehow I was preordained to do anything like this. But I think that one thing that helped me was because of what I touched on earlier. My childhood was particularly sticky, you could say. We had some family suicides and a lot of moving around, and it was pretty messy. And when I went into the Army, I got out of the Army and I started following the Grateful Dead. So what I didn't do was ever get into the 9 to 5 world. My last boss was in 1988, and that was Uncle Sam. So I've been self-employed and doing my own thing. So I had never had a human resources or have to ask for a day off. And I've always made my way in whatever I could. So in that way, the programming, the sort of social programming of what makes one successful, for whatever reason, never sort of attached itself to me, or I never attached to it, however you want to look at it. So I think that probably helps. But and that's something that you can't teach. That's something you can only experience, you know. But at the same time, I think that there's a lot of value in giving up those sort of programs, as you said, of things that you're supposed to do. You know, when you talk about purpose and all this, I think sometimes we put a little bit overemphasis on those things that might limit us to only doing this thing that we conceive. When in every moment, everything is available to us. We're able to adjust and go.
Yeah, I
You know,
think
that's how humanity got here.
yeah, I think that's a valid point. You definitely don't want to be so closed-minded or focused on one thing that assuming that, you know, that's my purpose and this is what I need to be doing always and forever for the rest of my life. I agree with that. But at the same time, I also believe that there are no such thing as coincidences in the universe and that everything seems so synchronistic and like that there's just almost like there's this master plan that unfolds with people and in situations. But it is interesting though, and I do like your point though about, you know, maybe not being completely focused or closed-minded to, you know, on one purpose and just to be open-minded to being able to adjust and just kind of let things flow and happen.
Yeah, and let me clear up a little bit of what I said. I do believe that somebody having an idea of their purpose in life is very valuable. You've got to have an overriding plan that sort of is you have to have some intention on what you're doing in life. But at the same time, you can't, you know, one thing that I started saying a few years ago is the hardest addiction to break is being right. And that's so difficult for most people. I'm right, and damn it, that's the way it's going to be. Well, maybe it's not. But if you don't give yourself the chance to even question yourself, you know, you're never going to know for sure. And that's about raising your awareness. You know, people talk about consciousness and all this other stuff, raising it. I think that's key to a lot of it is giving up this part that we think that we know. But at the same time, we have to be clear on where we want to go and what we want to do. And as far as a preconceived plan and things like that, well, you know, people can look at that however they want. It's much like spirituality. You know, you can have God, you can have a tree, you can have, you know, some kind of other esoteric type of thing, crystals, whatever. But if you have something that you can actually latch onto, that you establish as something that you're going to go with and stick to it, action is the number one thing on all of those things. You have to actually follow through with what you're intending to do. Otherwise, you're just going to be there. And as far as things like luck, you know, people say, oh, you were lucky to get through it. No. I mean, I agree there's some kind of luck. You know, if you're walking down the street and a piano falls out of the window and you happen to be just whatever. But at the same time, to me, luck is more of opportunity meeting preparation. And so the reason that happens is because I was ready for it. It wasn't lucky. I think the people that talk about luck are kind of envious of others that have actually taken action to make their lives better or to do something better. And that's not a dig on anybody. So if anybody heard that and gets a little, whatever about it, I'm trying to pick on anybody. But still, at the same time, we walk up to every single situation in our lives, whether we like it or not. And there are random things, the guy that robs you in the street, blah, blah, blah. But the vast majority of it, we have to take ownership of.
Yeah, that's valid. So what are your thoughts then? What is maybe your thoughts on the importance of mindset, or even how mindset kind of shapes your future? Because I think if you would have came in with the mindset after that diagnosis that you had 6 months to live with, the complete opposite outlook, like it's over and I'm going to give up and shit. I mean, you likely wouldn't be here talking to me right now.
No, who knows? None of us are crystal ball readers, or maybe we are, but I'm not. But, I think that mindset has everything to do with it. When I said, I don't buy your myth of death, that wasn't an act of, big ego or anything. That was an act of courage in believing in myself. And that's something I think a lot of people fundamentally lack, And so if you have courage that you can go in there and make an effort at something, there's that saying about there that, doing something and winding up in the same situation is the same thing as not doing anything at all. Well, that's fine. That's sort of a sort of victim way of looking at it. But the thing that's different between those two scenarios is the one person that tried actually did something. And so keep doing things, keep being proactive in your life. And if you do that long enough and you find success, you find failure, and in the failure, look for what you can build upon, you start building that courage and believing in yourself. And I think believing in yourself is the number one thing that all of us can do. I have no way of knowing what could have happened back in 2011. I could have dropped dead in 3 months. Who knows? I could have got a random, who knows? I'm not going to sit here and speculate. But it didn't. But what I did do is I went home that day and I stopped doing all the things that I had been doing. I stopped eating like chicken wings. I was living in the sports world for a number of years. Everywhere I went, speaking of Georgia Bulldog clubs, I was covering the Georgia Bulldogs, Southeastern Conference, all these various football things that I was going to. It was all about wings and beer and pizza and all that. And I gave all that up immediately. And I stopped watching the news. I was like everybody else. I was addicted to 9/11. It's now 10 years later, but still, we're all still watching the news. That was a pivotal moment 10 years earlier where we became, all of a sudden, we had to watch the news all the time. And so I sort of shut everything off. Not that I was bypassing it, but it wasn't serving me. The only thing that I could do right now was to take care of myself, do whatever the next best decision was. And so long as I did that, I was putting myself in a better position. I did that over and over and over and over for 9 years.
And I think what you just said is probably a portion of the answer to my next question. But what would you say to somebody, maybe who was diagnosed with the grim news of cancer, maybe even terminal illness, something of that sort? What would you tell them to maybe, what should they do?
Well, irregardless of the nature of the cancer, the number one thing you have to do is to see the positive outlook that you can make through it. And so long as you believe that, you can make those decisions. You'll have the courage to actually try. You can't just go into your bedroom and give up. You can't get in the closet and hide from reality. You can't just listen to everybody else and sit there and suck your thumb and cry about it. Sorry if that sounds rough, but that's the reality of it. These are terminal conditions, and this is not, like, oh, I got high blood pressure, take some medication or whatever. When you're diagnosed with these kind of things, they don't just go away. You've got to do something about it. And that's you that's got to do something about it. And again, I'm not trying to point the finger too much, but it's serious business. It's kind of like war. This is serious business. You've got to act and you've got to be on the offensive. And you can't be on the defensive because you just don't have time for that. So do whatever you can to change any kind of habit that has anything to do that is conducive to the cancer growing. And that fundamentally starts with your mindset, and then I think another thing that's sort of way off the cuff here, I think it's important for everybody. And I'm not a guy that promotes religion or even like you mentioned the shamanism thing with me. You know, there's a lot of ways you can look at that. But I think that it's important for us because I was not a religious guy at all before 2011 or 2011, whatever. But I do think it's important because when you're in those situations where it's just you at the end of the day and you've got to make those decisions, it's easy to feel lonely. And if you can connect with anything at all that you would consider a higher power or source or anything else that you can sort of have an internal dialogue with that is a positive thing and not an internal dialogue that tells you about, oh, I'm doomed, I'm going to die, that you can use that in a place of your solace to grow on and build on. You know, there's a big difference between loneliness and solitude. Loneliness is when you're alone and you feel that way. Solitude is to be able to hear your own thoughts regardless of the noise around you. And so in that solitude, you can have a voice that is conducive to your health. You can have an honest dialogue with yourself. And it's amazing how that can help. I found that out firsthand. So I would say mindset of positivity, not some form of weird toxic positivity that you now hear people talking about where you just bypass everything, but real positivity where you're going to take action and do things. And then a place that you can go to on your own where you don't even have to listen to anybody else, but just you and whatever you put in that spot.
Just a sense of maybe spirituality, get in touch with your spirituality.
Some form of, right. I mean, even if it's just going and sitting in nature and enjoying the trees, that counts. Whatever it is, right. You define that. It's a personal experience.
I mean, I think the majority of people would agree, even if you don't necessarily believe in God or read the Bible. I mean, we're spiritual creatures. I think you need that connection. You need that spiritual connection. Because I think at the end of the day, I mean, and I could be wrong, and maybe some people don't agree with me, but I think at the end of the day, we're all connected to source, and we're all spiritual energy beings that, you know, that are here to experience this physical realm right now.
Absolutely. On a personal level, to echo what you're saying, yes, I think that we are all, you know, however you want to put it, spiritual, energy, light, having a human experience, that absolutely is the case. Because if you look around, we're all exactly the same when we show up. And we're all basically the same people, same person, just in different incarnations of it. And, you know, you look at the way that human thought has developed, and not to get too deep into consciousness and all this stuff over the years, but yeah, we are all connected. We're just as connected to everything around us as well. And the more that you can expand that, the more that you now have allies that can help you in whatever way you want to do it. And don't let anybody tell you it's hocus pocus. You know, if somebody wants to, if you believe in God and you go to church every Sunday, don't listen to the agnostic or whatever that's trying to tell you otherwise. If you want to do crystals and attach to that, don't listen to the person that says that's woo-woo. Do you, but make sure that when you do it, you're actually getting something out of it. One of my best teachers that I had several years ago said there's no inherent value in the jaguar or in the crystal. It's only what energy you put into it that you get out of it. And I think that is great. All these symbols that we're so attached to in the world, and I'm, again, not trying to step on toes here, but it's what you get out of it. Don't get a victim out of it. Don't give it responsibility. Don't give it credit for your success. You know, that's what happens with addiction. You know, people get into a situation where they say, oh, if I don't drink, I don't feel good. Okay, so now you just gave credit to your happiness to this other thing. When did that start? You know, and so there's a lot of those are very similar. What we have to do is to give our own selves credit for getting ourselves there, and these other things around us, have them help us get there. If they don't serve you, get them out of there.
Tell me about Wind and Raven. I also love the logo, by the way. It's one of the coolest logos I've ever seen for any business or company. It legit is one of the coolest logos ever. And I'm not just saying that. It's a cool logo.
Well, that's great. A friend of mine from North Carolina, she actually made a handbag for me in about 2006 or something, because I was really into Nordic stuff and all this, and that was the Raven that we ended up using when we had the thing made. And so Wind and Raven itself, the way that I sort of explain how I became the name of what I've done since 2014 is that I kind of look at it like the way life is. You know, the wind is sort of the chaos that's always there. There's always going to be, and nothing can stop the wind. It's going to blow. There's nothing you can do about it. But in a lot of spirituality, and particularly in the European ones, Celtic and Nordic, the raven is sort of synonymous with sort of wisdom or flying above or some manifestation of something that at times is dire and dark, but overall is sort of a clarity of vision. And so the two of them, wind and raven, are basically, you know, like I said earlier, in every instance of chaos, in every instant in our life, there's opportunities before us. Can we see it? And so the wind is the instant, and the raven is the seeing, the opportunity. So I started using that. I was in year 3 of the sickness at that time. And so that's when the site was born. And then next year it became my recovery thing, website for recovery coaching. But I became a recovery coach. And then I sort of gradually moved in this sort of esoteric shamanism type stuff. And so today it's largely just the esoteric takes on it. Since I've left I no longer am a certified drug and alcohol counselor. I sort of found that kind of constraining, you could say. And I felt that there was so much more available out there that I would just sort of make my own brand of it without trying to be some shaman or something like that. That's what other people call you. But I think there's a lot of value in the way they look at the world. So that's the way Wind and Raven is today.
And then you have clients and, you know, people that reach out to you, I'm assuming that.
Yes, I have a lot. Well, not a lot right now because I've been traveling for the last 18 months. It was more so when I was back in the States. Most of my clients are people. Okay, to back up, when I was in the States, since I was the sort of the recovery coach before recovery coaching became a thing, I was sort of like the redheaded stepchild, I guess you could say, of the practices that I was associated with in Athens, Georgia. And so they sort of gave me some of the people that they thought really didn't have a chance. And they also gave me recovery coaching groups. So I would have people for groups like once a week. And the way that I approached it was to sort of mimic and just deliver the same way that I was looking at my own sickness. So I'd sit up there and talk about all these sort of ancestral stories and stuff like that, and try to make connections to today and what they could get from them. Sort of like, you know, the way we look at Greek mythology or Nordic or whatever. And there's messages there. It's not just about fancy monsters and all that, but the message, the core. And so I would tell these things, and it really went really, really well. But over time, I was such a sort of outsider that I started getting increasingly the people that they didn't think were going to have a chance. And so it ended up becoming more people that were included suicide and things like that, because at the time, most practitioners didn't want to handle suicide because of the liability with insurance. And so over time, my clientele became sort of deeper and deeper, much like I was in my own situation, you know, particularly when cancer came along. You know, in 2017, when I received word from the Veterans Administration that I had cancer, I went on Facebook and I wrote, this is what I wrote. I said, hey, everybody, I've got some dire news, but it's encouraging. I have cancer. And after that day, cancer, I never referred to it as cancer until after transplant. I only referred to it as my teacher. And I just tried to gain as much from it. And the encouraging part was that I knew that finally I'd be able to be on a transplant list, because now my situation was even worse in the eyes of medicine. And that ended up working out well for me because, you know, 18 months after that, I ended up being transplanted. But because of that and the way that I sort of ran into the practitioner thing at the practices, the staff, the regular certified social workers and stuff like that, I increasingly got these sort of outlier type people. And then I became a drug and alcohol counselor, and I started working with them remotely, as I had always done. And so being a veteran, I got in touch with the VA, and I ended up meeting a couple of people that were Iraq and Afghanistan veterans, PTSD and suicide, stuff like that. And so today, about half my clientele on a one-to-one basis are veterans because of that. And then people that are facing a whole myriad of things like, divorce and addiction, and they got like all kinds of things on the table, which is, not that fundamentally different than everybody, because the relative level of pain in somebody's life, regardless of what it is, if it disrupts your life, it's just as valid as anything else, and and so you have to understand that from my point of view. And so I work with people now in a wide variety of transitioning from one mindset to another to overcome some major obstacle in their life. And again, without tooting my own horn, I've been pretty successful in that. I think I've helped some people find their own way through, and that's not because of anything that I really did per se, but maybe some awareness that I helped them see.
Yeah, because they got to ultimately put in the work at the end
Action.
of the day. Yeah.
Exactly.
What motivates you, man, to help all these people and to do these types of work? Like, what is it about you, or what is it? Is it a drive? Is it a sense of spirituality? Is it a sense of, giving love to, others, maybe to strangers, showing, a sense of brotherhood, or, what is it about you that makes you want to help all these people in all these different circumstances?
Again, I think this goes all the way back to the way I was wired from the earliest days. I've always been in a situation where I had to find my way through, moving from family to. I went to 11 different schools before I dropped out in 11th grade, and I wasn't a military brat. That was bouncing from family, members, and all this. And then, of course, we had a suicide. I've had 3 siblings that are no longer with us, and so it's always. Not that I'm saying the cards are stacked against me, because I'm a firm believer that I've not met an odd that I can't beat. I'm not a victim of anything, but I've had a lot of challenges, and everybody that I've always been around, even in the bands in the 80s and in the Army, when I was promoted really quickly to be a leader, and all these other things, I just want people to excel and to do the best that they can, and to never believe all these voices around them that tell them they can't. Just go, just be yourself, just do it, and start doing it right now. So I think that, I really don't have a clear answer on where that comes from, other than that's just who I am. That's not something that I picked up along the way. That's something that I remember doing even in earliest grades in elementary school, and it's just who I am.
Without, maybe putting yourself into a box, or perhaps, focusing on just one generalization of your purpose, but what do you believe your purpose is, or your purpose is? If that makes any sense, what I just said.
The funny thing about this is that my fiance is she's a coach from the business world, MBA and all this stuff, helps business leaders, and she works with purpose all the time. And this is a running battle, you could say, because I've always been a person that my purpose is to enjoy my life in the way that I want to. And now how that's going to be, it shifts from time to time. But what I do know is that I see things that I want to do, and I do them. And I have a grand plan as far as to keep doing them. I don't know how much I have to be compartmentalized into having a purpose in that way. Now, that said, I believe it's important to have a purpose. And so to me, it's been sort of always problematic on identifying that. But I would say if I had a purpose, it is to help other people realize that their life is completely theirs, and that they are responsible for all of their choices, and they're responsible for all their opinions of how that goes. I have a saying, life is, and anything you add after that is your opinion of it. When people say, what's the point of life? Life is. Anything you add after that is your opinion of it. So make the most of it. Make the most of your time here in whatever way that you choose. but you have to be responsible about it in the way that is actually conducive to your health, your happiness, the people around you, things like that. So it's not just some sort of, weird bypassing. But it's hard to put an actual label on, given the set of labels that we have available to us these days. I just think it's best for us all to do the best that we can, and that's my purpose: is to every day do the best that I can, and to help inspire. But I hate saying it like that because I'm not taking credit for anybody else's inspiration. But to be there and to do what I do and help people in whatever way it is that they interpret that.
That's a really good answer. And I also really like the fact that you recognize that your purpose can change and shift. I think sometimes people, as you mentioned earlier, maybe, stay focused on one thing, or they think that, it has to be this way or that way, when it could be a lot of different things, right? And things change and things shift. And if you just allow them to flow and go with it, a lot of times I think it works out.
It's all about being in the flow. You got to stay in the flow, and that doesn't mean that you just sort of float along and go through life. But you have to have a rhythm to it, and you have to establish that. You got to not complain about things going on around you. You have to stop listening to the random opinions of others if it doesn't help. It's always good to hear what they're saying. Think for a second, maybe, why are they saying that? See what you can grab from that. But don't get stuck on it, And then, like I said earlier, I think it's great for us to have something that we can connect to that is out there in whatever form that comes, just so we can have that time in our solitude to hear our voice, and just that pure voice of divinity, which is in each of us, without any kind of religious connotation, because we're all, wonderful people, and I'll just leave it at that.
It's wise words. It's wise words, my friend. Stephan, thanks for taking the time tonight to, spend with us and, share some of your inspiration and your story. It's inspirational. Where can the listeners check your work out, find you, that kind of thing?
My website's the best place, windandraven.com, spelled the way that wind and raven are spelled. I do a number of things on YouTube and on Facebook and things like that. But all of it is centralized on Wind and Raven, and it changes, much like you can tell. Just go with whatever seems to be next. But if anybody wants to talk to me about anything going on in their life, I do have like a free call to talk about it. And if it seems like something that maybe we could work on, we can go from there. And if I don't feel that I can help with that, but I think that I might know somebody else, I'll be sure to say that. Again, it's all about people finding their own way. And all of us out there that call ourselves teachers or whatever, it's wonderful. And I'm sure there's some that are just so good you can't believe it. But at the end, it comes down to the person to change their life on their own.
Well said. Hey, thanks for being on the show, and we're going to have you back on.
All right. Well, thanks a lot, Dylan. This has been great.